Hello, and welcome to the Cinemondo podcast with Kathy, Mark, and Burke, talking about movies, horror, sci-fi, unusual, unknown, forgotten, underappreciated, always interesting. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Yeah, super. How about you, man? You
I'm
hanging
doing
in there?
good.
Yeah.
Watched a very, very fun movie show.
Yeah.
What are they now? Is it a movie if there are only four? Like, it almost seems like it's a long documentary.
It's a series, it's a four-parter.
I guess it's a series.
That's what series are now. There is as many
it's a
episodes
mini
as they
series.
want to be.
Remember the
But, I always look at it as like a 3 or 3.5 hour movie. I mean, that's what, once you say, I'll just watch the first episode, and then if it's good, you're hooked. And you're like, I'm just going to watch all 4 of these tonight, basically.
And the great thing is the thing we're talking about today is a true crime documentary called The Night Stalker about Richard Ramirez, who terrorized our town, our neighborhood, actually. And the cool thing,
kind of all over the place too.
Yeah. But the cool thing about this idea of a documentary like that is, like, in the old, in earlier years, you would see a documentary film about Richard Ramirez. It'd be like an hour and a half or something, and it's over. And they would have to condense the story into a smaller amount of time. But with things, the Netflix and everything, where people are sort of binging things like this, it's like you can have a 4 or 8 part series about one crime, one serial killer, or one, true crime incident type of thing. And you can go into so much more detail into it. I mean, if you're into, seeing documentaries and learning about, these horrible things that happen, and you really want to know the real story, like the story underneath the story too, and the backstories of the different characters and people, it's a great format for true crime.
It did. And honestly, I mean, I just can't get enough of true crime. So when I see there's a series, a true crime series, like the Joe Burnder's Bundy series, and then, this, and then there's the Ripper. It's like, I am so happy when I know there's 3 or 4 episodes, because I feel like you're going to get a really good deep dive. You're getting lots of detail. They're going to take their time telling the story, and I'm not going to get bored. This isn't something I'm going to be like, it's too long. It's like, you're just going to keep watching it. It's just the way it is.
Well, you feel like you're on the jury and you're hearing the case facts. You're hearing not everything, of course, but you're hearing a good overview of the real thing, because they're trying to fill up 4 hours or 5 or 6 or 8 hours. And sometimes you go into these, red herring tangents that the police, and that sort of gives you a feeling of what the police were going through.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say this particular one, I watch all of these too. And this particular one, it is about Richard Ramirez, but you don't hear his name until at the end of episode 3.
Right.
So the first three episodes is really, it's about the policemen who are following these murders.
Right. And how the investigation's evolving, as it spreads out to different, areas.
It's a true procedural. It's about, it's their story and about the story of the victims. Mm-hmm. And they do a really nice job, because LA is a huge, the topography of LA, it just goes on for hundreds of miles, it seems.
Yeah.
But they do this nice thing where they say, okay, downtown Los Angeles, and the camera moves to the left, in this visual way.
It goes over a map, like a 3-dimensional terrain map. And it shows you the relationship of the places.
I love that, because now living here, oh my gosh, I know where that is. But even if you're not living here, you get a sense of where this killer was doing his bidding in the Los Angeles area. So that was a very interesting way of showing and getting the feel of people in LA being terrorized by the Night Stalker.
And he was so prolific, because I didn't realize that his reign of terror was relatively short compared to some serial killers. He would sometimes commit like 2 or 3 crimes in a night. Yeah. He would drive to all these different areas and and one wasn't enough. He'd go to another and do another one. And he was racking up the numbers on this stuff. And it's such a short amount of time. And I think that also was throwing the police for a loop, because the victims were very different. The motive, the mode of killing was different. Nothing was the same except for a shoe print.
Right.
So that's what was, and also a caliber of gun. but sometimes he didn't use a gun. So he was such an anomaly when it came to serial killers that nobody really know what to do about it. They were like, is this the same guy? I think so. Like, it was just a weird, and sometimes he'd let people live and sometimes he wouldn't.
Yeah.
Like, it was just so
Right.
random.
So
It was very weird.
These two main investigators, Gil Carrillo and Frank Salerno, are the main characters of this docuseries. And Frank Salerno was famous in New York because he was involved. He actually captured the Hillside Strangler.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
in L.A., right?
Yeah.
In L.A.,
Yeah.
in Glendale.
Because you said New York, and that confused me.
I said New York. Oh,
You
my
said
gosh.
New York, Mark. You're totally confusing.
Like, what?
You're being like the Night Stalker, like random.
Okay, Los Angeles. And so he was already famous in LA as being somebody who caught the Hillside Strangler. Now he's involved, but they don't know that it's the same guy because, like you said, it's all different stuff happening all over the place. And so, and especially in 1985, and it's true today, like the LA County Sheriff's Office is different from the city of Los Angeles, is different from the city of Glendale Police.
Yeah.
So it's all these different, organizations trying to talk to each other and trying to get credit, trying to get help. So it's just a jumble. And I got a sense of the procedural problems and the headaches and the hurdles that these people had to go through, and all the missteps and screw ups that
in
caused
pre-computer times,
Yeah, it was all analog. And there was even a moment where, and this is the classic setup where they're just not collecting the evidence. And so he'd stolen a car and they managed to get the car. He ran away. They got the car. They sent it to the police to print because I guess they had to. It was some kind of jurisdictional thing. So the police said, yeah, we'll store it for you and we'll print it. Sat there forever, never printed it. They finally asked to get it back and they were able to get it back, but it was a big deal. They had to keep nagging the police to get this incredibly important evidence. And by then everything had burned off the car because it's sitting out in the sun.
Right.
But then they ended up finding evidence inside the car. But this is something that could have saved lives early on if they were allowed to get in the car and get this evidence. So I love seeing that sort of snafu along the way of like how the bureaucracy of the whole law enforcement system of, there's all these different divisions and they don't talk to each other. And sometimes, one cop will be in one area, one in another area, and they don't communicate that they have evidence that they have. Like, it's all very confusing. And you can only imagine how it gets even worse when you cross state lines and you're in a whole other different state. So that's why a lot of these serial killers get a lot away with it for a long time, or crossing state lines and being very random with the victims because no one communicates. So it's pretty fascinating to see it up close.
And the thing with that car is the evidence on the car was a behavior that it's like, we have a friend, if anybody listening to this knows our history with true crime documentaries, Kathy and I were actually in a couple of them, and got to meet some people who worked in crime solving. And one of our friends, Brent Turvey, used to talk about the idea of evidence indicating behavior, and one of the things that was found in a crime scene was a bloody pentagram drawing on the wall. And apparently with the rental car you were talking about, the suspect drew a pentagram on the hood of the car with his finger,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the evidence that they neglected to collect at that time. And it would indicate a behavior. In other words, what he did matched something on a crime scene, and it would include your fingerprint evidence. So it's like a bite, like what we used to talk about with bite marks. It indicates a behavior, but it also provides a biological match. So you've got not only can you match a person's teeth, but you're also proving that person violently bit the victim. And in this case, you've got this matching pentagram, but you also attached to that, you have a fingerprint potentially.
Yes.
So they blew it,
The films Burke is talking about was Paradise Lost.
Oh yeah.
The documentaries about the West Memphis 3, we got involved in that effort, but in doing that, we get to see up close a lot of the procedural problems with the case, how law enforcement handled evidence, how they handled interviewing suspects, who got interviewed, who didn't, who was given kind of a free pass. And if you're familiar with the case, you know about all of that. So in watching this documentary, I see them making this documentary, and I'm seeing a lot of the same problems that we noticed in the West Memphis 3 case in this, people not communicating, not collecting certain evidence. It's pretty fascinating just to see it, inside out.
It's like they're not taking it seriously. It's almost like there's some people on the police force who are like, this is a lead. This is something we should follow. And there's other people who are saying, nah, it's nothing. It's not that, we'll catch him some other way. But, that guy who drew the pentagram on the car, that's not related,
Well, there was a really good lead that they had from the dentist who Richard Ramirez had gone to see, and they ended up positioning two undercover cops in his dentist's office waiting for Richard, for Ramirez to come back, because apparently it was a tooth problem that was going to hit him hard and he had to get it fixed because there's no way to live with it. So some genius decided, too much money. Let's take these guys out of this office. It's wasting time. Literally the next day, Ramirez shows up at the office. They could have caught him. Yeah, in the meantime, how many more people had to die because of that guy being a cheap ass?
Right.
God,
or
so
not
frustrating
that was going to result in anything. Just not
their only lead. You know, it's like, God,
but the crazy thing is, like,
he's not going to come back.
Well, as you said, there's so many different crimes that were happening, so they couldn't be convinced it was the one, the same person. But then media started getting involved and realizing that all this stuff is happening, and so you have these people from the local channels coming in, and they start, or the newspapers start calling him the walk-in killer and the Valley Intruder, and finally the Night Stalker stuck.
A walk-in killer. I mean, could that be like the most boring name or not scary sounding? He's just gonna walk in.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
But then people started.
Here he comes. Walk away.
Here comes the walk-in killer.
He's sauntering in.
Yeah.
We laugh. It's gallows humor.
Yeah. Well,
let's wander away from him quickly.
But once the local news gets involved and it becomes the top story, then the pressure on the police department, we got to get this person, or persons.
Yeah.
So I found
also sorry, go ahead.
No, I just found that fascinating. The fact that, Angelenos are buying guns now. It's like, we're going to, and so it became, I didn't live here at the time. None of us did, but I can imagine the threat, the threat level was up here. And it's like, now we've got to find him. Now the cops, now the reporters are on our backsides.
I've talked to a lot of people, like some of my neighbors, lived, and I live in an area that was kind of around where he was operating. And I've talked to some neighbors about that, Richard Ramirez, and even the Manson kind of things, which the Manson murders and the Ramirez murders really was like that sort of, LA lost its innocence. I think the 60s lost its innocence with Manson. And people suddenly started locking their doors. There's a sequence in this Night Stalker film where somebody says, "I'm gonna have to start locking my doors now," and it sounds so weird to us. But back in those days, I remember where I grew up. Even it's like we didn't lock the door. Nobody locking your door. Why would you lock your door?
Because there's a serial killer.
Yeah,
that would be one good reason.
And one of my friends was telling one of my neighbors who lived here during the Ramirez thing. She said, she's like, when you drive through these LA neighborhoods around here and look at the older houses, a lot of them have bars on the windows. And she's like, that's because of Richard Ramirez.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, there's actually a interview with a daughter who had told her parents who had been murdered by the Night Stalker. She kept telling them, you need to lock your doors. She's like, I didn't move here, so I had to lock my doors. It's a nice neighborhood. And then they end up
this is LA. Why would I lock my doors?
And I cannot imagine sleeping in my home with a door open.
I know.
What
neither can I.
It seems so crazy. I mean, I'm like alarm systems and motion detector lights and just I can't imagine just leaving a door unlocked every day, just letting people in. I mean, he didn't even have to break into most of these places. Windows were open. Most of it was very easy pickings for him.
Well, like with the Manson murders too. I think a lot of people just because Manson always talked about that they used to do things where they didn't murder people, where they would do they called it creepy crawl. They go into somebody's house and just go look at their stuff in their house while they were sleeping.
So creepy.
And the idea of that happening, like what if, you're just fast asleep and there was Manson family members going through your stuff and secretly coming in
out of your fridge or
It
Yeah.
just
It's weird too because the Ramirez was operating the same time the Golden State Killer was, and there were a lot of similarities. The
Mm.
breaking into the houses, eating food, kind of hanging out
yeah.
after he committed the crimes, like this weird sort of, just living in this environment where his victims had lived. Like, it's amazing to me that you could have killers with the same sort of MO operating at the same time, and then also him using the pentagram. And
Well,
so
the say
like the West Memphis 3 case, like using the satanic, imagery to scare people. Because
well that
he Satanism. He
no
was
well that
trying to freak people out.
well that's what
It was
brought it
so
that brought
ridiculous.
the panic and frenzy up. As soon as
Mhm.
you bring in swear to Satan instead of swear to God, that
Right.
Yeah.
threw people, into this different crazy, and that's when it just, all of a sudden also it just became much more great fodder for the top news story of the day. I mean, as soon as you bring
Yeah.
that in, it's like,
But
It
it's
was
kind of a
it's kind of
fetish,
nuts.
it's like people that do this kind of thing, it's
Mhm.
fetishistic. There's a another thing that we've learned about as we've been to our level of involvement with true crime situations is that there are people who fetishize certain things, they sexualize certain things, and it's not always pleasant. It's sometimes people fetishize like the Manson family going, the creepy crawls going into somebody's house and getting kind of a kick out of being able to do that, and then just sneaking away, and they'll never know we were there.
Maybe move
And
something around. So they'll
yeah,
run
or
like, did
or
he come
leave
here?
some little thing, like a
Yep.
little
yeah.
talisman on their dresser or
Yeah.
something. I was here. And Ramirez had an element of that, I think, where I would say, I imagine, I guess, my theory,
Let's get inside his head. No thanks.
my theory is that he probably did that. He probably went into people's houses who he didn't kill or attack.
Yeah.
He probably did that a lot, which probably, when he was young, a teenager, whatever, growing up,
Hmm.
he probably snuck into people's unlocked houses, went through their stuff, maybe took $5 out of their wallet, just not enough to say, I've been robbed, but
Right.
enough to where I thought I had $5. I guess not,
Yeah.
and then, you know what I mean? But just,
Or just buy or eat some melon out of the
yeah,
fridge, or
Yeah.
all that,
And
all
leave
that
it on the
kind of stuff.
counter,
Yeah,
Well,
like
they
what's that?
they said they connected into some murder that was like the year before, and then there's
Right.
that big gap until to the new murders. So they're thinking there's actually probably a bunch of other murders he was committing, or some sort of crimes, rapes, whatever, because he was so random that might have happened that they weren't connecting him to. So that was
Yeah.
another kind of interesting little factoid.
And then the San Francisco part,
Yeah.
it's like
Like
being
he
able
went
to
there for
connect
one
those.
killing. What? It was so
Well,
strange.
that goes to the part, like, there's, again, going back to the procedural about, the hard evidence that they found. And one of the big pieces of evidence they found in many of these, crime scenes was a footprint,
Mhm.
of a sneaker, of a particular sneaker that
Very
was
unique.
very unique. In fact, only one of them, I think, was sold in the LA area, and the rest went to like a different state.
Yeah, black, specifically a black one.
Yeah, a black Avia,
Mhm.
sneaker. And that was fascinating because it was like, okay, this is hard evidence.
It's his calling card.
Yeah,
Like
and
every time
But
I
it
saw the
was,
print, it was almost like he left his initials on the scene. They were in
but
every scene.
they got the size of the shoe, so there was
Mhm.
only one pair of
that's what it was. Yeah,
Avia
size
black,
12s.
and the assumption was that they were black because all the witnesses said that he was dressed
Mhm.
entirely in black. So the cops were thinking, the detectives who were investigating the case
Yeah.
said, let's kind of assume that his shoes were also black. So that's what they were looking for. They were looking for
Crazy.
black
And it
Avia,
worked.
this size. And that's what was only, I think they found that size, there was only one pair sold,
But they couldn't figure out who they sold it to, so it was kind of a dead end. But
but
it was
that
still
was
interesting.
only sold in LA. But he
Mhm.
may have bought, I mean, who knows? He could have bought them in, Utah or whatever, So they were going on a lot of assumptions, which is kind of what you have to do. They got nothing else. But they were like, if his shoes were black, if he bought them in LA, then, and then when they found out that there was only that one pair sold in LA, apparently, in these pre-computer days, they didn't keep any records. They didn't know who they sold it to. So it was like
Right.
dead
But
end.
wasn't that footprint found in the one murder up in San Francisco?
Yeah.
That's what made them think that was
Yeah.
the same
Right.
guy.
Mhm.
Right. And then I think at that time, the mayor at the time was Dianne Feinstein. and she went out and did, something that the police were not very happy with.
Right.
Well, it's classic 101 way to sabotage an investigation is to send out all the information that wasn't public knowledge so that now the killer can rectify those things like change the shoe, change the gun,
Yeah.
all these things that were the one thing they were connecting all the murders with. So, such a bad.
So after she said that, Richard Ramirez very likely burned those shoes,
Right.
and said, "I'm not using this gun anymore, throw that away." And
Yeah.
so then the police were like, "Okay, from now on, whenever there's any more murders, we're not going to be able to use the shoes or that gun to connect
Right.
them." And so they had to look at something else,
Yeah.
Well, what I think is interesting too is that they caught him in such a random. Well, they were led to him in a very random way when they finally got his name, and that's where you kind of go. There's all this police work. They're doing all this work, and then a guy just comes in with this bracelet.
Right.
And then
Right.
when they start tracking where this bracelet came from, it leads us almost a direct line to Richard Ramirez eventually.
Yeah.
So that's when they were like, I think we got our guy. He looks like the sketch. So it's amazing to me that there's no little detail too small that might actually crack a case like that. And that's why I thought it was so fascinating, because I'm sure the guy who took in the bracelet was like not really intending to crack open the whole case. And it ends up that's where it went, which was fascinating to me to see that happen. It was like, wow. Just like,
And
I
in
think
so
that's
many
probably
cases, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's because I think that's probably what happens. Is like because there's so many missteps and blown things that happen in these things that we could the car and the footprint, the fingerprints, and the shoes. That something like this is what really ends up cracking the case.
Yeah.
Every single time, right? I mean,
Fascinating.
it's crazy.
Well, you really have to. A lot of times, the investigators have to count on the perpetrator making a mistake, or being stupid. It's like, I mean, with all these arrests that we're seeing right now with the Capitol insurrectionists, the fact that they were just so unbelievably stupid is why they're being caught. And with Richard Ramirez, I mean, it turns out that he was basically bragging to some guy about having murdered people. He's like, "Oh, I killed some people. I killed a bunch of people, and I stole this bracelet from one. You want it?" And then it's like,
so stupid. Well, Joe Kenda, Detective Joe Kenda. Everybody knows my love for Joe Kenda. He has a great quote where he goes, "First of all, criminals are just stupid and they're just not smart, and they can't hold down a job. Most criminals,
serial losers.
They're freaking dumb. They can't hold down a job. They don't do themselves. They're just dumb. They do crime because they can't do anything else. So the cops are way smarter than they are, but they need help from the public a lot of times to nab these people. But that's exactly what happened here. They needed the public to bring them that clue that ends up, leading them to him, because those people are not smart." He wasn't smart.
We hope
he got lucky. He left so much. He left that footprint at every scene. That was so stupid. They just had to catch the right guy.
But these were in those days. These were in the days before it was, another thing, going back to our friend who works in law enforcement and some other friends that I've talked to who work in law enforcement who tell me that, have you noticed in recent years, there isn't a serial killer. There isn't this named serial killer anymore, that like the Night Stalker or the Boston Strangler or the Hillside Strangler or
the good old days.
I know those are gone, but or seemingly gone. But the thing is, the reason, or the speculation and the theory is that the reason is that there's so much technology. There's so much
I agree.
home security. The idea of how many people used to say, "Oh, my house got robbed, my house got burgled." I knew people in the old days. You'd hear about it, like, "Oh, they broke in and took my so and so, and they broke in and broke my so and so. It took my thing." You don't really, knock wood, you don't hear that so much anymore. I think because everybody's got security. People who want to commit crimes do other things now. There's other crimes that they do, and you don't really hear too much about home invasion robberies. And you don't really hear about these serial killers. And this is a creepy aspect of it that I presented this theory, and a friend of mine who works in law enforcement agreed with me to an extent. But what I think is that those fetishistic serial killers like Ted Bundy and Gacy and those weird ones, the ones who sexualize murder and death and all that kind of stuff. There's not so many of them now because they can satisfy their weird urges on the internet now.
Hmm.
Maybe. I feel like, I
Is
mean, they're the problem. Well, the thing that's happening now is these people are getting caught on film.
yeah,
So you're seeing a lot. Like there's a few shows out there that specialize in that, but they're seeing like people breaking into homes and they'll have a video of it, or they'll see a car leaving the scene. It's the same car.
yeah.
So it's sort of starting to happen. But you're right. It's like a lot of it is, they aren't getting away with it for as long as they may have. Like it could be like a serial killer in the making, but they get caught faster.
Yeah.
And
You know,
just the
so
idea that someone, if they're thinking about doing that, now that's in the back of their mind. It's like,
mhm.
what if there's cameras? What if I leave some, because they don't maybe understand the science of DNA, but they're like, if I walk in to this building, am I going to leave my DNA in here somehow? And they're going to catch me with the DNA. And so the fact that there's so much science now involved and there's so many TV
Yeah.
shows showing bad guys getting caught because, we found a fiber and we found your DNA and we found, there's a hidden camera and we zoomed in on the reflection and we enhanced and we turned it backwards and we found your license plate number, that you see so much.
I don't know how anyone thinks they'll get away with a crime anymore.
I know.
You can't drive to a gas station without getting filmed. You can't go, to anyone's house without getting filmed on a Ring camera. I mean, I see Ring stuff filmed, shot every day. In fact, I have an actual film of a guy taking all packages off my porch.
Yeah.
Right in front of me.
But
It's
that still happens. Yeah.
That still happens and the cops do nothing. But, he didn't murder me.
Yeah.
But you see all these people and it's creepy. You see people climbing over fences on film trying to get into people's houses. Now, in another day and age, that guy probably would have gotten in and there'd be no trace. But
Well, we watch these shows from in the year 2021 of things that happened in 1985 or 1975, and we watch them going, oh, this is a perfect time. They should, this is when Ramirez would have been caught.
Exactly.
If he was trying to do this in 2021,
Mhm.
or Ted Bundy would have been caught if this was happening now.
Yeah.
So it's that is a comfort angle for us. Like this Ramirez could have not gotten away with all these murders if he was trying to do this now, which is a good thing, because there's so many times in this particular docuseries where you go, oh my God, how did he get away with that? How did he get with that? Like he's on a bus coming back from Arizona, the Greyhound bus terminal in LA, and his photo is on top, the LA Times, the LA Herald Examiner, the San Francisco Chronicle. It's like, and then he goes, oh, I better get on a bus and get out of here.
Yeah.
In a way, I feel like maybe they should have shared this information with the press sooner. I mean, that's one thing I thought about when I was watching this. They were very careful to keep everything really close to the vest. But now, once the press got a hold of it and started feeding the public all this information, he got caught. So I wonder now, maybe that wasn't the best strategy.
But they only got caught after they had an actual photograph of him because those
but I wonder if the information might have been more, Yeah, I never think those things look like anyone. Look, the scarring looks exactly like him. I'm like, does it?
Does it? No, it
looked like me or so. I don't know.
It looked like Gumby or something.
Yeah, it was
so we should talk about the actual film. Yes. But we should also talk about our YouTube channel that everybody needs to go subscribe to. Also, true crime is so big, and I would love to hear what people have to say about the Night Stalker. So if you guys are watching this or listening, please comment on our YouTube channel about what you think of the Night Stalker case, what you think of the cops, what you think of him. Tell us what you think.
And if you lived in LA at the time this was happening, what were your memories of that? Were you scared? And I mean, because I didn't live here. I lived at the time, I think I was living in Atlanta or Florida or something. And I heard about it. But, we had in Florida where I grew up in Tallahassee, I was there during the Ted Bundy thing. So I remember the feeling of, the Bundy, it was scary, living so close to something like that. And people were murdered right near my house and stuff. And I know that people who lived out here in LA went through they went through so much with the Hillside Stranglers and the Ramirez and the Manson family. And it's like LA has such a bad reputation, unfortunately, for things like that. And there's nobody more those things that kind of ruin the innocence of daily small town life. LA went from being a sunny, fun place where they make the movies and everything to being this terrible place where people get slaughtered in 1969. You know what I mean? Must have been
Totally.
awful to live here at the time.
Well, and for me living here now, and especially with the towns of Monrovia and Pasadena and Eagle Rock and Glendale. I mean, I live in Glendale, so it's just like, wow, that happened right here. That happened right down the road.
I know you recognize all these neighborhoods. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's really creepy. And the fact he was so random and so just unstoppable in a weird way makes it even creepier. I mean,
Yeah.
and I thought it was an interesting little tidbit in the film where they didn't show him, but they kind of had his quotes. They had him talking, and just his, to see all these neighborhoods, to see the victims, and to have sort of that voiceover of his sort of creepy justifications or thinking of the time. It had this weird sort of haunting, mentality over the whole thing. You're watching it going, oh, this is the guy that's doing it.
Well, Kathy, what'd you think of it? What'd you think of the series? I mean, as a film,
Well, it's funny. I was seeing some pushback on it because they were other reviewers had said they thought it was too gory and too lurid, and they didn't need to show all these murder scenes. But I always get a little annoyed by that because we're watching a film about one of the worst serial killers, who was super brutal, and you're watching true crime. Why are you not going to show the crime scenes, or why are you not going to show the brutality? Because they kind of want it both ways. I think you don't want to glamorize it, which I think by not showing the murder scenes, in a way you kind of do, because they seem very whitewashed. They seem very, not that extreme. I think you have to see, it can go both ways. You have to see the gore in a way. I mean, they make sure to cover faces and things like that, but I think if you're just going to skip over the lurid details, then you're just going to think, oh yeah, so he shot some people. Who cares?
And you get to see the other thing that's really hard to see about this, aside from the gory photographs, is the people who were impacted by this, the family of the victims.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, that is a lot harder to watch than the bloody crime scene pictures, because so often people are like, oh, I love true crime. And they're kind of like, yeah. And it's like, it's cool, but then when I think that comes from documentaries who depict true crime as this sort of, oh, it's fun to solve the murder. And, but when you actually see the people whose, her mom was murdered by Richard Ramirez, and they found the body, and, there's these details that are so horrifying, and and it's like, you hear these people saying these things like, my life changed at that moment. And not a minute of my life goes by that I don't think about my grandma or my mom or my, this. And one of the hardest things, she was so powerful in this film, but this woman who was talking about how she was abducted by Richard Ramirez when she was 6 years old and kidnapped by him. And she doesn't go into detail about what he did, but what he did. And the way she says it, you don't need the details, but she went through an unbelievable nightmare as a baby, as a 6-year-old baby child, this little girl who was taken away by this monster. And, but now she's like, I have a family, I have children, and I deal with it. That was pretty heavy. That was pretty powerful.
Hey, Burke, I think we have a special guest waiting to join our podcast right now who would like to talk about the Night Stalker, what was going on in LA at the time. So can you let them into the room?
Oh, yeah.
Oh. We have a special guest.
We have a special surprise guest.
Who could it be?
It's Chad, my husband.
I know that guy.
Hey, man.
So I asked him to come in.
I miss all of you from this pandemic thing. It's like, we spent so many movie nights and everything. It's good to see you, Chad.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted Chad to come in because he lived here during the reign of terror of the Night Stalker, and so can speak to what it felt like and how it affected his life. So go ahead, Chad. Tell us what it was like to be in LA during this horrible, scary time.
Well, technically, I actually didn't live in LA, but I was here all the time because, I used to live here and then moved away, but I come back to visit and crash on friends' couches. And
you knew LA at the time.
Oh, very well. Yeah. And I would couch crash everywhere, or come into Hollywood to see a show, then, pass on somebody's couch after the show, or.
So you knew the vibe of LA at that time, the feeling of
LA
at that time.
I grew up most of my life here ever since I was, a baby, really. So, yeah, I know the 80s and how LA was at the time in the 80s. And yeah, it was a really, really rough place. It wasn't, people go, oh yeah, the 90s were dangerous or whatever, but the 80s were like the 70s in New York.
Oh,
so
really?
how did you guys react to, like, when the Night Stalker thing was happening? Did it come, like, was sort of an in joke, sort of like, oh, we better get home before the Night Stalker, or was there any kind of like acknowledgement of the fact that there was this weird thing happening out there?
Yeah, I know everybody was talking about it, and my friends' parents were scared. I mean, when you're young, you think it's ever going to happen to you, So, I think I was 18 the year that was going on, 18 or 19, but you just, when you're young, kind of like whatever, but it just seemed part of the LA landscape because LA was so dangerous, and you would go out, like we'd go to a show or just go into Hollywood for the afternoon, and you didn't know if you were going to get into a fight or get chased. Or or get, like, it was, have a gang chase you. Like, it was like, it was like the Warriors. It really felt that way. So the Night Stalker at the time was just another layer of it. It felt like, oh yeah, of course there's a guy around, sneaking into people's houses and raping and killing them and, and writing satanic symbols on the wall. Of course, it's Los Angeles.
Oh no. Yeah. Do you remember when he got caught?
What's that?
Do you remember when he got caught?
Oh yeah, very well. I remember I was working at a hotel and as a bellman, and they had like the free papers for everybody, and it was when USA Today just came out, and I remember seeing on the front page of USA Today that picture of him, and going, what? And just like reading every little thing, call my friends up, like, no, it was a big deal. It was a big deal, and people were really relieved, were visibly relieved. I mean, people at least older than me, like I can remember my friends' parents,
You can sense it at the end of the film. I mean, not sense it, but see these people. It's like, a party, like it's just this great weight is lifted off their shoulders.
Yeah.
Like this guy is behind bars.
Yeah.
And what a great ending. The ending of the story is so cinematically perfect, where he is literally chased through the streets by an angry mob, and beaten up. And I lived downtown, for 15 something years.
Yeah.
Not during the time, but afterwards. But people who lived in my area, I lived right across the street from where they caught him. And people in the area who lived there for a long time, they used to point to this one place. They're like, that's where Richard Ramirez got caught. That's where he was sitting.
Yeah, it's like it's a place. There should be a plaque there or something.
Yeah,
exactly.
It was neat though to see, like, I enjoyed watching it because they really did nail what it felt like then. Like that old footage, and it was smoggy as hell.
Yeah,
brown. You can say fuck.
yeah, but it was way worse. Like we would have smog alerts, like stage 1, 2, 3 smog alerts, and where kids, you couldn't go out and play, and you would feel it. You'd go out and you ride I ride my skateboard at my friend's house, and I couldn't breathe. Like literally when I got to the other end of the neighborhood or whatever. Wow. But that grainy footage really showed what it felt like, and it really had that sense of menace, because LA had a sense of menace to it then.
That's interesting.
That's where the whole punk rock thing came from, where you wonder why certain music scenes or pop cultural things happen. Right. And during that time, I think, that we were talking before about the Manson murders kind of ended the 60s, the love and peace thing.
Yeah.
And Richard Ramirez sort of, put a stink on the 80s in LA. And I think there was a lot of anger and a lot of hopelessness kind of rippling through the streets at that time. And you can hear it in the music, you can hear it you listen to bands like X or something.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what they're reacting to is that what you're talking about, that sort of dark,
X is the personification of how LA felt that time. That first record really feels how LA felt.
And the cover image,
Oh yeah,
the name of the album.
Everything about it.
Well, Chad, I lived back east, and in the 70s, I had relatives in New York City, and I would visit there all the time. And when I was watching this, I said, "This reminds me of the 80s LA reminds me of the 70s New York."
Yeah. I said,
which exactly what you said. Yeah. So it's like, holy cow, that's so true. It's element of danger and intense, sort of like, man, I'm living in a grimy, gritty place where shit can happen. Yeah.
And it felt like stuff would happen on an instant. You could be, it'd be a nice, bright, sunny day, and all of a sudden somebody's throwing shit at you. You're like, what did I do? You know, and I remember riding my skateboard down Melrose, and some dude just like, I was just when I'm in a business, I was by myself. It's like probably 1986 or something, and some dude with a giant big gulp just heaved it. He's drew by. It knocked me off my skateboard, knocked me on the ground. I'm like, of course, it's LA, you know.
That's so funny.
Punk rock, man.
The hostility of it.
I was more worried about, like, I was just more worried about, like, is that guy gonna come back now and jump in his car and try to beat me up, or, you know, I just got out of there. You know, I just got off on a side street, so you know, we wouldn't circle back around. You know, and it just felt normal. It really.
So the other thing, I remember that being that way in Atlanta too. When I grew up, you know, kind of going through the music scenes and playing in bands in Atlanta and stuff, is that edge, you know, that you don't feel so much anymore now that we're adults. It might be partly due to the fact that we are no longer teenagers and early 20-year-olds in, you know, sort of engaging with the underground like we used to. But yeah, there was definitely a different feeling. And I guess, what is it? It was before cell phones, before computers kind of numbed us all down a little bit, and kind of,
maybe that could be, part of it. And it was just, you know, I guess we're always evolving as a society.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think, you know, and you know, the 90s, of course, you know, you gotta remember in the 80s, economically, the country was in a shit pile except for the top 1%. You know, Reagan made it great for 1%, but then you know, we also suffering. And the 90s felt like it really was this economic boom. And I remember, you know, because I moved to LA. I moved to LA permanently in '88. But you know, so of course I was here all through the 90s. I got my career started in the 90s. But I just saw there was so much upward mobility in the 90s. And 90s really, LA from 91 to 99, completely different city. You know, and I lived right off Hollywood Boulevard from 93 to 2001. But I watched Hollywood Boulevard become a really scary place to a really kind of like touristy, family-friendly place. Yeah. And it was all based on the subway. The subway did a lot of that. Right. The subway could, you know, they cops really wanted to clean up Hollywood Boulevard because they wanted to bring tourists in, because the subway was going to bring all these people here. And that's kind of what kicked it off. So that's part of it. I think the subway is what made LA safer in a way.
And we were just talking about the fact that it depends. I guess I don't know if it's an issue of definitions or whatever, but the idea that we don't have you know, and again, I'll knock wood, you know, we don't really have a serial killer. We haven't had a, you know, like a Night Stalker, the Dark Man or the Slender Man or whatever.
Not caught yet.
We have them in movies. I mean, there's still movies about serial killers, but they almost seem like weird, almost like science fiction now, or fantasies or something, where there's this fetishistic killer who's, you know, striking again. And
there was definitely an archetype that was being perpetuated in society. And also too, you got to remember too, LA at the time, you know, we had the Hillside Strangler, which they mentioned in the Star, of course. We had the Night Stalker. We had Charles Manson, which left us. The stink never left LA after that.
Yeah.
We had the Freeway Killer. You know, the Freeway Killer that was abducting boys. Right. You know, that's for you know, situations and, you know, within a 15-year span.
Was Samuel Little in Los Angeles another serial killer, like the most prolific of all?
I don't know.
Not sure if you.
I don't know.
One of those questions we don't know. Kathy.
But those were always, they were back to back. Like, you know, the Hillside Strangler and the Freeway Killer were simultaneously. That was happening together.
Yeah. Wow.
And then, you know, the only reason because the guy was, the difference was they were both jumping bodies on the side of the freeways. Yeah. But the other dude was raping and killing boys, teenage boys. Yeah. So that's how they knew who it was, whether it was the Hillside Strangler or, you know, the other guy. Yeah, it was a weird time, man. But yeah, I've seen it was very ubiquitous, and the Night Stalker was part of that fabric. That's what it felt like. It was just a part of the fabric.
Well, thank you for being our man on the street who actually lived during lived in LA during that time. It's thank you for popping in.
No, I actually permanently lived in LA when they had his trial and he was convicted. And that was a big deal too. I remember everybody was talking about it because it was on TV like every night on the news.
I bet.
They would have like just like the OJ trial, you know. They'd have little updates every single night. They would, you know, talk about, you know, that people outside the court talking about it. So
I remember that, and I remember all the groupies and stuff. And what the hell?
Yeah. Weird. But it was in '89. The trial, I think the trial and conviction were both '89. And that was on nightly television. So it was talked about more then actually than when it was going on. You know?
Yeah.
That was
I
right
bet.
before I moved out here, and I at that time was sort of fascinated, with the true crime. I guess I still am, but back then it was still sort of fresh. There were still there were still there was a lot of books back then, like the crime novels. I guess the like film noir kind of pulp crime novels were kind of having this resurgence.
Right.
And there were books, like Jim Thompson books and James M. Cain, and all these books were being republished by like Black Lizard Press and all that. Mm-hmm. There was this kind of renewed interest, like James Elroy, like books like Killer on the Road and things like that. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting, what I was talking about before, is it's just so bizarre that young people now kind of, fortunately, haven't gone through a time when there was this killer on the loose,
Yeah, and at the time too, of course, the late 70s and the early 80s was the golden era of slasher films too.
Yeah.
So you had this coinciding thing of life imitating art, back when the other way around.
Right.
And now, like, those kind of things look cliche, but they weren't cliche. They were actually happening then, the Night Stalker was kind of like Jason Voorhees. Like he kept going. He couldn't find him. He couldn't catch him. It was almost like supernatural or something.
He's always lurking. You never know when he's going to pop out of the bushes. Yeah.
But I did feel that they did a really good job of making LA feel like it did at the time. And they also, I felt, speaking to that kind of that pulpy nature, the way they shot the guys, they had that hard boiled.
Showed them in the car together driving. Yeah, it was
in bars drinking.
Yeah, with the glass.
Yeah,
it's very cool.
So that was cool too.
Yeah.
Anyway,
they were the stars. And Chad, you can pop in anytime.
Drop in anytime.
Doesn't have to be an LA centric thing.
And by the way, for our viewers, our people who are not just, if you are listening to this as a podcast, you're not getting the visual of Chad's paintings behind him.
Oh yeah,
that's right.
He's an incredible artist.
It's a sort of shockingly good artist here. That's another thing I miss hanging out, is getting to see those paintings in person, because when you see them in person, it's like.
Yeah, they're very. Yeah, you see on Instagram, they're like the size of business cards. It's our only means of looking at things now. It seems,
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Everything's like this big on the screen.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, Chad.
Last minute.
hope to see you soon, live and in person.
Yeah.
So we can get the vaccination going, right?
Yeah.
All right, man.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Okay. Ciao.
Take care.
See you later.
That was fun.
That was fun. Sorry for the sound quality. He didn't have his AirPods in, which I thought he would, but okay.
It's okay.
That's okay.
Fascinating. But
no, it's good to hear. The thing is, there really was a different attitude to the city back then, and that's what a good documentary will portray, that and give you a feeling of it. Because, I was alive and functioning on my own in the world in the 80s, so I kind of know what the 80s felt like.
Yeah.
And it sounds funny, but there's so many people alive right now who don't remember a time before cell phones.
That's right.
And computers and internet and sharing this vast information thing. Mm-hmm. But back in those days, you were on your own, man. If you were out in your car and your car broke down,
that's right.
You had to deal with it.
Yep.
And
you had to walk to the gas station. That's why all these women got killed.
Yeah.
And the news was the 5 o'clock local news, the 6 o'clock news.
To get the news, you had to watch it.
And watching those news clips of like Channel 4 or 2, and it's like they were what everybody talked about the next morning at work or at school or whatever. That was it. It wasn't, internet was that was it. So that's when you sense like, okay, this is what it was like to deal with a mass murderer, a serial killer.
That's right.
It's like the cops were on their own. You were on your own. You got the news at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and that was kind of it. You figured it out.
Yeah.
The newspaper.
And
so Samuel Little was a California serial killer. He's apparently the worst one in history. He killed, I think, 93 women.
Wow.
So he's like worse than anyone else.
Wow.
And he gets no one knows who he is. No one's heard his name, but he was a serial killer operating all at the same time. this
But
crazy
a long time
golden
ago,
era.
right? Was he before all this and kind of up and down the freeway?
He
Like,
was the late 80s, early 90s.
oh,
Really?
okay.
Hmm.
But he wasn't solely LA. He was all over California, I think.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, there was some reason why they couldn't catch him because
Yeah.
he didn't consolidate, he didn't
Yeah. He wasn't in one
concentrate
place.
in
Right.
an area.
Oh, so back to the movie. So anyway, so I was talking about like the pushback on the gore, even though I feel like you can't sanitize true crime too much because I feel like I think a lot of true crime people like true crime because it feels kind of safe. They don't give you a lot of detail. They'll say, oh, someone was murdered or someone was stabbed, but they don't give you the detail. It's not that you want the detail, but I feel like for you to know that it was the tragedy and horrible, you need to hear the depressing stories of the victims. You need to see the horrific nature of the crimes. Otherwise, it's just sort of another story. And so I feel like that wasn't fair to the film. I think, even though, they had some very stylized gore, like the falling hammer with the blood on it. They did some things that I think sort of gave a little bit of a sheen that they probably didn't need to, but I appreciated the visuals. I'll say, and I love the cops being the heroes. Like basically, you were following them very linear from the beginning to the end of the crime. Like you didn't get interviews with, Ramirez beforehand. Like Mark had said earlier, he didn't even show up in this till like the last episode. So you're following these cops. You really get to know the cops. You get to find out what they were up against to even solve a crime of this nature. You get to see how it was affecting their personal lives. I mean, it sounds like they were getting like 2 hours of sleep a night and they were completely burning out, and it was just insane. And they're going up against all the bureaucracy, and
the guy's marriage was
really
in trouble. His wife was talking about how, we left, we had to leave, because
they didn't feel safe.
Not just because the, dad was never home and he was always preoccupied or whatever, but the fact that he was now famous for trying to find this notorious murderer. And, his wife,
there was a murder near his house in his neighborhood.
Yeah.
Remember they talked about like there was a actual murder near Diamond Bar. So then they were like, okay, it's getting too close. Now it feels like he's just taunting us,
Right.
Yeah.
So I liked that. I mean, I don't hold it against any kind of crime documentary that's going to actually show you the crimes and see how terrible they were, because that's kind of the point. I mean, really, Paradise Lost got the same criticism for showing them finding the bodies of the 3 boys. And there's actual footage of them pulling them out of the water and putting them on the bank. And a lot of people thought that was really gratuitous, unnecessary. But that is all the evidence they had. The bodies were the evidence. So I feel like you need to see what happened to these boys. You need to see the crime. Otherwise, it's too like far away and nebulous. You don't really understand how horrific it was.
I feel like with the Paradise Lost things, you don't get to say whether or not you see it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The kids didn't get to say whether or not they experienced that. And it's like, if you're going to watch a information about a murder, that's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. You're seeing in the Paradise Lost films, there's one thing that will never exit my mind. And it's my friend, Pam Hobbs, who I got to know over the years, when she finds out that her little boy was just found dead, and she just collapses, she wails, and it's this scream that I can never forget. And she just falls down. And it's like, to me, that kind of thing is an element of every murder story. And you don't see that so much. The murder stories are sometimes sanitized, or that's like cutified, or it's like, ooh, he's getting away with it and he's a murderer.
Or they glamorize the killer.
Like an Alfred Hitchcock movie or something, where it's like kind of like, or Alfred Hitchcock Presents, where the murder, like it's clever, oh, she killed her husband and it's clever. But then you take a step further, it's like, what about the husband's mom and dad? What about the husband? What about the kid? There's
or
so
even the family of the
more.
killers.
Yeah.
I mean, how it affects their lives when their son or daughter kills someone.
And we need to know that that's a part of this. That's why the cops are out there working and try to find these people, because they they talk to the families of the victims and they see their anguish, and that's what drives them. And you really get a sense of that too, that sort of drive to catch this person. And it's not just this competitive thing. Like, I want to win, I want to beat this guy. I want to bring justice for these people and for the victims.
Right.
Well, it doesn't. This doc, anybody saying that Ramirez is glorified in this doc, they haven't watched.
I don't get that.
It was ridiculous. In fact, he is, again, he's not really talked about until the very end of episode.
They barely
3.
show him.
And episode 4, I mean, they have some voiceovers from his
Mhm.
tapes from later. He talks about that, so you get a little bit of that. But in the last episode, he's just kind of a pathetic, sad.
Preening, like he was getting
Yeah,
off on the
yeah, just kind of, yeah.
attention.
He doesn't come. I mean, I don't
Anyone who
understand.
thinks that's glamorous, I don't get
It's
that.
yeah, I don't get that at all.
Yeah.
And so I thought they hit the notes right. I think maybe the falling bloody hammer and stuff was, I could have done without that, but I'm not going to go nuts about it. That's just a couple of shots.
Yeah.
So overall, I thought it was very well done. It focused on the cops. It focused
Yeah.
on the media. It focused on the
The
sense of Los
victims.
Angeles, and it focused on the victims, and that's the focus. Ramirez is at the end, and you get the coda, what happens to him in prison, and all this kind of stuff, and that's fine. You have to have that, but that's not the focus of this. It's called the Night Stalker, but it's not about the Night Stalker.
It's more about how the Night
movie,
Stalker
so-
affected everyone around him and the city itself.
Exactly.
It wasn't
Exactly.
about him. It was more about his influence. I also thought there was a great moment where the daughter of one of the victims said she was at the courthouse when this was all happening, and she saw this young boy sitting there who seemed kind of disturbed and stuff. And she was like, I wonder why he's here. Like, did he know a victim? Is he here to see justice? And then she knows he had a pentagram on his hand, like Richard Ramirez had showed the courtroom in that famous photo. And she was like, I can't believe somebody's here, like, in a way, kind of worshiping, or, here being a groupie for a guy who killed my grandmother. Like, and you see that and you go, oh yeah, that's bad. Like, and how messed up do you have to be to think that's good? I mean, it's just, I'm amazed that people, and this happened also in Joe Berlinger's Bundy, how groupies can latch on to someone who could be that horrible, horrific a person and think it's okay that they're somehow someone worth pursuing.
That's why you show
blows my mind.
That's why you show the horrible stuff. Sadly.
Exactly. See, they didn't see the horrible stuff. They heard stories they didn't know.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. But I thought the documentary was well done. I learned a lot, the things I didn't know about, the crimes, and I liked getting to know the cops that solved the crime. It was really interesting.
Directed by Tiller Russell. He was the guy that sort of,
Yeah, he used to work on the Chicago shows on NBC.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was a writer, I think, on those.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was very well done as far as the pacing and everything. It's storytelling. I mean, you are telling a story, and you have to figure out what you want to show and what you don't want to show, and how long you want to spend on this aspect of the story and how long you want to spend on the other one, and that is a skill that it should, ultimately it should be invisible. You should watch it and it should progress and wash over you, and it gives you this story. And the story is satisfying. I mean, as horrible as it is, it has a satisfying, bittersweet ending. But it also has, the story of the cops is interesting because the cop, there's the superstar detective guy who had worked on the Hillside Strangler cases, and then there's this young cop who his story is interesting because he keeps talking about, like, whoa, I just got tapped by this superstar, and now I'm going to be his partner. And you get this sense of, his career progressing. And it, you realize it's like, wow, he's progressing because of his attitude and his skill and because this superstar detective is not going to sense the quality of this person's character and bring him into his circle to help solve this case. He wanted him on the team because, I guess, partly because he spoke Spanish and knew the neighborhood and could get around in the neighborhood and knew everybody and kind of had that. But also there was a sense in this guy that he kind of had a quirk, a clever quirk, that you need to solve crimes, because he was presenting things as this young, unexperienced cop. He was presenting things that this experienced cop was saying, hey, that's smart. That's a good idea. And they worked together, and that was a great team, and almost like a fictional kind of teaming, the experienced grizzled cop and the
jovial,
inexperienced kid,
Yeah.
And then the ending of the story, I thought, was very cinematic and satisfying, where he is literally chased down, like I said before, by an angry mob and beaten up. And when the cops got there, they're like, there he is. That's the guy. And that was the end of his reign of terror.
Yeah,
and it
done.
was because these people in the neighborhood, I love that, they all got together and
got him.
they took him.
Yeah.
And they recognized him from the
was great.
newspaper, and they're like, "We're not taking this anymore." Mad as hell.
Yeah, it was great. So yeah, I recommend the documentary. I thought it was
absolutely.
very interesting. A good, solid true crime doc.
Yeah, you'll zip right through it too. It's
Yeah.
not. It's something that you're going to watch probably in 1 or 2 nights, like I did.
We watched it in one night. Just one more after it was over. One more.
Yeah, you keep going. And that's what a good documentary, a true crime documentary will do. So
That's right.
Yeah.
So, we enjoyed it. We recommend it. And I also recommend you checking us out and subscribe, and please like our videos and comment, especially if you're listening to our podcast, you can go to our YouTube channel. If you're listening, somewhere else, you can go to the YouTube channel and comment, and you can look at Burke's finger.
His little friend who's telling you where to go. And you also, if you go to the YouTube channel, you'll see a lot of other content besides the podcast, which I think everybody will like. We have shortcuts, which is like short mini reviews of films that we don't talk about in long form. We have trailer reviews, all kinds of man on the street. Like, there's lots of fun stuff. So check it out and let us know what you think of it.
Yep. And we keep adding to that all the time. So we're just growing. The Cinemondo universe is expanding.
We're taking over the web.
It's an empire right now.
Yeah. Talk to us on Twitter, Instagram, we're everywhere. So check us out.
Yeah. And thanks for listening and watching always. We really do appreciate it.
Good. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye,
Take care.
everybody. Cinemondo signing off.